dominates our lives. Consider the amount of time we spend in education, which is designed to gear us up for a life of work. There's the time we spend searching for work, preparing for interviews, the time we spend improving our skills outside of work, the time we spend getting ready for a day's work, the time we spend commuting to and from work, the time we actually spend at work, the time we lose to overtime, often unpaid. There's the time we spend recovering from work, worrying about it, venting about it, the time we feel guilty about calling in sick if we're anything short of dead, the time we spend organising in unions to make work less awful. Not to mention the years our lives are cut short or impaired because of the accumulation of physical and psychological stress over the course of our careers. To emphasise, it isn't just the time at work that we can't call our own. With no time or energy left at the end of the day, our choices are constrained. We're unable to do the things we'd like to do to our fullest, and so we turn to convenience goods instead. Out goes self-sufficiency and doing things at our own pace, and income-ready meals, Amazon deliveries, and products that compel us to multitask. Things like athleisure wear, or entertainment systems that let us Skype friends, listen to music, and play games all at the same time, like the absolute dangers to society that we are. When leisure time is this scarce, it becomes fraught, which is why we approach it with the same sense of efficiency and productivity as we do with work. And even when we finally get permission to take our precious holiday to unwind from it all, it's often accompanied by that looming dread over the pile of work waiting for us on our return. Work dominates our lives. Allow me to share a few, hopefully relatable stories about the everyday horrors of work. I graduate from uni and I'm searching for work at home. It's me, the laptop screen, and the infinite horizon of opportunity behind it. I don't know what I'm looking for, or even know how to look for it. All I really know is there are jobs I'd rather avoid doing. Days, weeks, then months roll by trawling through the job agency sites. I'm not getting anywhere with the more interesting roles, so I lower my expectations and expand the breadth of my search to include jobs that are only vaguely tangential to my interests. Before long, I find myself licking the of business-to-business marketing firms I discovered that day. I assure them how their values are my values, and that I love the idea of their fast-paced free, inclusive family vibes, and all that other shit. I know that they'll know my application is bullshit, so I can only hope that my bullshit is more on brand than everyone else's, because that's the game. At the same time, I kind of hope to myself that my applications are rejected, because if I'm accepted, I might get locked into doing bullshit for a company for, 6 months? 10 years? Each application feels like an act of self-mutilation, to the point where tweaking one line of a CV or cover letter takes hours of psychological prep. Then, one day, I come to accept that I can't even reach the low-hanging fruit, and my soul evacuates my body. The remaining husk is left wondering why it's the only hunk of shit who can't get a job on the entire internet. Back then, while unemployed, I felt the full weight of work ideology on my shoulders. If I was meeting someone for the first time, I'd be racked with anxiety, dreading the moment they'd ask, "So what do you do?" That question pierces like a knife when you're unemployed, and I didn't have the fortitude to answer it straight. So I found ways of stretching the truth, by saying I'd just left uni or a bit-part job, even if in truth I'd left my most recent position a long time ago. Sometimes I'd say I was in between jobs, or give the impression that my voluntary work took up more time than it really did. Maybe I'd steer the conversation away from work before it could even be raised. I should stress that I didn't feel ashamed about being unemployed, or like I was any less worthy of respect than the next person. I had sympathy for myself, knew I was demoralised, and knew my lack of confidence was affecting my ability to search for jobs. It was more the fear of being judged against a social standard, made to feel like I should feel ashamed, than that I was ashamed. It's possible I was projecting negative thoughts onto people a lot of the time, but sometimes I could glean someone's judgment from a look or even a polite assurance. If I had no choice but to own up to my joblessness in a certain situation, someone could just say, "Oh," and that told me everything. There was also the general atmosphere around austerity, strivers and scroungers and so on, which added to the pressure. Stuff like that got to me, even though I didn't really buy into the work values that underpinned it. After a while, I decided to do warehouse work at a furniture company to pick up a few quid. I was encouraged to do so because it would be character building and improve my self-esteem. or something like that. I joined the warehouse on a 0 hours contract and was put on a rota. One week I'd be on the early shifts that started at 6 in the morning, the next I'd be on late shifts that finished at 10 in the evening. The job involved stacking boxes of furniture Tetris style onto wooden pallets, wrapping the pallets in cellophane by hand or machine, and then wheeling them around on metal trolleys so they could be loaded into lorries. On busy days there was virtually no physical let-up. On the quiet days, managers would keep you busy by making you repeatedly sweep the floor for no reason. On the really quiet days, they'd send you home at the start of the shift without any pay. The experience of loading a lorry in the summer was kind of unbelievable. Lorry containers would be backed up to fit snugly inside the warehouse, allowing workers from the warehouse floor to wheel furniture in and out. You'd be working in near darkness in those containers, but what sticks with me were the sauna-like conditions. If you were shifting an item from the top of a container that had been out in the midday sun, you could feel your eyes cooking in the rising heat. I met a worker there who'd served jail time. He was a live wire, capricious, and slightly terrifying to be honest. But there was something brilliant about him. He was actually quite rueful about being absent during his son's primary school years. After work, he'd unwind by playing a zombie survival game, pretending the zombies were his warehouse managers as he worked his way through them with a cricket bat. His eyes lit up as he described the last night's gaming session to me. He said, "At one point my son tapped me on the shoulder and told me, 'Dad, you do know you can move on to the next one, right?'" Like him, I found video games were the best antidote to the disorienting shift patterns, physical labour, and hypermasculine work environment. To give a flavour of the culture, one time a young new recruit didn't show up to the morning register for a second day running. An older worker observing this turned to his friend and said, "I knew he was a squeaker." After clocking off from bleak like that, I retreated to Zelda Breath of the Wild, an adventure game lauded for the freedom it gives you to explore its world. It felt like I was just switching back and forth between two modes of being, one confined by the walls of the warehouse, and one let loose in a fantastical kingdom, free to do anything and go anywhere, on the screen at least. It should go without saying that nobody deserves to work in a warehouse. It's a truly slavish and punishing existence. If you take the mental experience of doing the work, and combine it with the fact of living paycheck to paycheck, barely being able to afford a few pints at the weekend, and believe me, you'll absolutely want them, you start to see how big of a trap it is. It's even harder to escape that trap if, like the guy I mentioned, you have a family to feed and a criminal record deterring people from hiring you. I was lucky because I knew from the start I'd only be there for a bit. My qualifications would dig me out of the hole eventually. More importantly, my parents could support me when I quit the job after a couple of months, giving me the free time to search for something else. That wasn't the case for everyone else. I remember one guy who'd been there for 20 years. He was telling colleagues how he was thinking of moving to the warehouse across the road, on slightly better pay but with essentially the same responsibilities. But he was terrified about it. Partly it was concern over seeing his workmates less, but it was mostly that he doubted he could do it. That's what the warehouse does to you. It limits your horizons. Ambition is typically thought of as an innate characteristic certain people have, but the truth is it can be cultivated or extinguished by circumstance. Warehouses especially can drive you mad with anger. They're practically breeding grounds for it. Why wouldn't you be angry working in a place like that? When I later found a permanent job that was more befitting of my middle-class upbringing, I was freed from the weight of unemployment stigma. Now, if work talk came up, I'd get the nod of approval merely by disclosing my employer or job title. As shorthand status markers, these things are obviously very superficial. I didn't feel any more worthy or complete as a person for landing the job. I mean, sure, I was happy to get it, but the extra level of respect I received didn't feel warranted by the reality of my working life. Because the reality was that I was now spending 5 days a week in an office, and I was still only required to use a fraction of my faculties, or the ones I wanted to use at any rate. Besides, it became clear to me that whatever job you do in an office, in the end it's a completely undignified place to waste your life. For 8 hours a day you're sat in a sterile environment, sacrificing the majority of your daylight hours, muzzled by professional etiquette, tyrannised by email, and all the while you're slowly developing a musculoskeletal disorder that will make a misery of your retirement. Tasks don't have to be especially taxing for your brain to feel frazzled by shift's end. All's required is that you stare at a screen all day and have your fight or flight response triggered by Microsoft Teams every few minutes. Additional dull tasks and responsibilities are presented to you as if they're opportunities, and whenever it looks like a gap's opening up to display your creativity, your humanity, it's snuffed out by process, which is elevated to the level of religion. After a honeymoon period in the job, I found things became a slog. Work weeks would drag on. I'd long for the weekend, but the weekends would come and go in a flash. Under these conditions, sustaining enthusiasm for an active life outside of work was a struggle. On many weekday evenings, all I wanted to do was lie down and fritter away time online as a reward for getting through the day, so that's often what I did. And then I felt guilty for squandering the precious little free time that I had. Tell us what you really think. Working hard, or hardly working. You're going to the toilet again? That must be your P45. Will the circle be unbroken? My struggles during unemployment, manual work and office work felt intensely personal and unique to me at the time. In a way, of course, they were. But as I read more about socialist politics during my office job, specifically theory about work, I began to see how my struggles were part of wider cultural and structural forces and were therefore more universal than I'd imagined. Learning about the world of work wasn't about finding excuses or adopting a defeatist attitude to my career, as I knew there were things I could do to find more fulfilling work as an individual. I'm not against career advancement or hard work in the abstract. It's just that getting a better job didn't seem to address the brutal reality of spending a lifetime in work, for myself or anyone else. At best, it seemed like an accommodation, an effort to make the best of a bad situation, and that's probably the calculation most people make when it comes to work. In any case, it's worth remembering that jobs aren't designed to fulfill our personal needs, despite the way we sometimes talk about them. While it's true some forms of work are more meaningful than others, if we do find meaning at work, often it's because we're deprived of the time to make meaning outside of it, so we end up forcing meaning into work. Meaningful work doesn't come without downsides either, as people who work in charitable and creative industries often have their passion weaponised against them. Employers can get away with setting long hours and low wages because they know workers will accept them out of a sense of duty, be it to a just cause or a creative goal. The opportunity to exercise a passion becomes the compensation for being worked to the bone, and workers who push back are admonished, either for lacking gratitude at having something useful to do, or for not being sufficiently committed to their ideals. Meaningful work clearly isn't the answer to the problem of overwork, not least because of the scarcity of meaningful work. So what is the answer? Well, I'm glad I asked, because there's an idea going round that gets to the heart of the matter. It's called the 4-day week. This policy proposal says that people in full-time employment should only have to work 4 days a week, crucially without any reduction in their pay. You may remember the 4-day week became UK Labour Party policy under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership in 2019. While Corbynism suffered an emphatic defeat in the 2019 general election, quashing any hope of a nationwide rollout of the policy in the short term, the policy itself is highly popular among workers. 60% are in favour of it, with only 26% opposed, according to Savanta Comres data from 2021. Since the 2019 election, there's been interest in reducing work time both at home and abroad, with many businesses choosing to trial and implement it voluntarily. They're doing so because they're finding a well-rested, mentally healthy workforce improves productivity, staff retention, and ultimately their bottom line. This comes as welcome news. Unfortunately, there's no chance the 4-day week will become widespread unless workers are prepared to fight for it. Without a government plan to make the policy viable across the economy, the policy is only likely to benefit a privileged minority of office workers. I'm convinced the 4-day week could and should be made available to all, and that it should be pursued for its own sake. Having ample time free from pressure and coercion should be part of what we call the good life. I've been somewhat obsessed with the idea of the 4-day week since I heard about it, and been eager to share what I've learnt about it over the past couple of years. I've gone through several aborted scripts, snowballing lists of colour-coded quotes and notes, without any end in sight, without any catharsis. There was always another book to read, another idea to include, and naturally work would get in the way and dull my enthusiasm to finish a script. Equally, it was always the resentment inspired by work that brought me back to write about it after a long break. As a layman on the topic of work, and all topics, I decided it would be easier to break the 4-day week down into a series of videos. With this introductory video, I thought I'd focus on my personal experience of work. Then, in future videos, I'd like to break the topic down into 3 main parts. Part 1 will be an appraisal of work. I'll touch on the good things about work, because it's important to appreciate the rewards of working, but I'll mostly focus on its costs. By outlining the dismal nature of waged work, particularly its domination of our time, we can justify the demand to work less. Notice I'm including you now. As I've touched on, learning about work is a consciousness-raising exercise because it allows you to put your own work problems in context. Theory gives you explanations for various dreadful aspects of work that you feel on the level of experience, but which you can't identify or articulate in the moment of experiencing them. Reading accounts from other workers also helps you to see that wage work causes similar problems for everyone, despite differences between jobs. Part 2 will explore the question of why we work so much, by focusing on two overlapping explanations. The first is an analysis of power, which points to the political and economic forces that give us no choice but to work the hours we're given. Take a Marxist critique of capitalism as an example. With every passing year, advances in technology mean fewer and fewer people are needed to produce the things we need. This means automation and labour-saving technologies could be used to give everyone more time off work. But because the benefits of technology aren't democratised under capitalism, they're put to the endless pursuit of market generation and profit-making rather than human need, such as the human need for rest. Something of this predicament is captured in the Joke Onion headline, "Chinese factory workers fear they may never be replaced by machines." For the libs who soil themselves at the mention of Marx, it's worth noting that Keynes shared Marx's vision. In 1930, echoing the thoughts of his contemporaries, Keynes predicted there'd be a 15-hour workweek by the year 2030, based on the productivity gains he witnessed in his day. While he was right to predict that productivity would keep on soaring beyond his lifetime, he was wrong about the politics of how that productivity would be used. The power analysis also points to things like anti-trade union legislation, which make it difficult for workers to fight for better contracts, or oppose workload increases which result in longer hours. The second explanation for why we work so much explores our cultural obsession with work. It looks at how we, as a culture, effectively consent to, or rationalise, our long working hours. Some of us actively consent to the 5-day week because we think the arrangement is good for us, or necessary for society. Others might consent passively because, while they don't agree with the arrangement, they don't do anything to oppose it either. This could be because they aren't aware that resistance is possible, or they think resistance would be futile, or perhaps they're just not prepared to make the time investment to resist, which is more than understandable. In all my reading about the 4-day week, it's our cultural obsession with work, our love-hate relationship with it, that I find the most fascinating. The late anthropologist and activist David Graeber frames it as a paradox and asks, how can it be that our dignity and self-worth is caught up in working for a living, even though we hate our jobs? Uncovering the answer to that question would seem key to advancing the cause of the 4-day week. Because if we can understand people's contradictory attitudes towards work, what makes them attached to it, what makes them hate it, we can potentially make more persuasive arguments about the need to decrease the centrality of work in our lives. Even though I'm critical of work, I don't stand outside of work culture, so I'm not immune to its allure. For example, when I get on the bus to work, shirt and tie drenched through, while I hate the commute and the antiquated formality of my attire, on some level I enjoy being in the club of commuters on the bus, marked out by our professional clothes. It's as if we're telling each other, yes, we're off to suffer because we're serious people. By contrast, the preschool kid sat at the front of the bus is not a serious person. While he's off to do pointless, non-suffering activities in class, like discovering art and language, we're out in the real world doing serious business, like filing documents which will never be seen again. Another contradiction in my attitude is that I resent losing the occasional evening to work, and yet when I'm sat there in the office dealing with a complaint from Jeff at 7 p.m, there's a bit of me that loves myself for doing it. I salivate at the thought of winning my colleagues' approval the following day, and I don't care if I have to fish for it. We've all been guilty of workaholic bragging and bravado. I'm not saying we don't moan about our jobs a fair bit too, because we do, but we do love to say how hard we are for working long hours. We also embellish the positive aspects of our jobs and conceal the true depths of our work despair because we think it'd be admitting career failure. The point is to take a step back from the workaholic habits, which make us feel good in the moment, and ask if they leave us exploited and broken in the long run. Theory can help to render workaholic habits absurd and tease out our deeper desires, as far as it's possible to deduce them. On the plus side, there already appears to be a latent desire among people for lifestyles less centred around work. It's just that this desire isn't currently being expressed as, or channelled into, a demand for reduced hours. The sociologist David Frayne writes, quote, "Go to any high street bookshop, and alongside those books promising to instruct readers on how to influence others, accumulate fortunes, and achieve career success, one can also find a shelf of books telling readers to slow down, find a better work-life balance, and seek happiness by consuming less." In the context of contemporary capitalist societies, narrowly fixated as they are on the activities of working and spending, the ultimate message of these books is a valuable one, tapping into the rippling disquiet about the ways in which work has crept into and colonised our lives. If these popular critiques have ultimately had a limited influence on society's priorities, however, It is perhaps because they have tended to stray too far into the genre of self-help. Their mistake has been to approach the domination of work as primarily a problem of individual habits, and it is fair to say that these books have been rather more conservative when it comes to discussing those systemic economic and political changes which might offer people a more genuine range of lifestyle choices. That brings me on to what I want to talk about in part 3 of my 4-day week discussion, which will be about reducing work. I'll draw attention to the societal benefits that spring from work time reduction policies and ideas about how they might be achieved politically. As a quick summary, some of the main benefits of reducing working time include the following: improving people's physical and mental health, giving people more time to participate in civic life, which for the left means organising on other issues, creating a greener economy by reducing the number of commutes, and giving people more time to engage in exercise and other low-carbon activities, creating conditions for a more balanced division of domestic and care work between men and women, and reducing levels of unemployment by distributing work more evenly among the population. Various things can be done to advance the policy at the state level, like bolstering union power and providing incentives for firms to adopt it. But before that, there's the task of campaigning and organising. We have to start politicising the amount of time that we work, and help people realise that the 5-day week isn't, as it may seem, a natural fact of life.
The lives that we live and the sort of, the social relations that we're embedded with, we tend to mistake them for eternal and natural occurrences rather than the end point of a whole series of historical and social forces. Do you know what I mean? That we build up a natural picture of the world that is actually quite hard to get out of. And one of the first things that you need to do if you're going to think about changing the world is to realise that it's changeable. Why was consciousness raising and consciousness raising groups so vital to second wave feminism? It was because they had to denaturalise the concept of what a woman was and what their capabilities were. They had to denaturalise this, received idea that they lived in, to take their lives and discuss them in order to realise that a different way of living was possible.
James Blunt is sick. Denaturalising the 5-day week partly consists in looking at our history, the story of how workers fought their bosses and their 6-day week to win us the weekend. We need to find a way to revive that historical struggle to reduce it even further. I wonder whether other issues have the same potential to connect with people on such a visceral, everyday level. The galvanising power of the 4-day week lies in the fact that it speaks both to people's fears of life lost to work, and their own dreams of what they could do with their lives and who they could be otherwise. For me, a 4-day week would mean rediscovering the joys of reading and learning, which shouldn't just be reserved for academics. It'd also mean having the time to practice video editing and make things I care about. Maybe it's sad to say, but there's more of me in this video, in this minor act of creativity, of reaching out, than there is in my last few years of work. We're all bigger than our jobs though, measuring our worth so narrowly as they do. It'd just be nice to have a chance to prove it. Beyond simple dreams of hobbies and relaxation, the creation of free time has the potential to transform the very fabric of our relationships. On that note, I'd like to end with a lovely passage from Sarah Jaffe's book, Work Won't Love You Back. She starts by citing a podcast clip, which I can play the audio of now.
I don't want to spend any more of my time. In fact, I've actually given this up, and I talk about it quite directly to people. I don't want to catch up for a coffee with anyone anymore. It's such a crock of shit. I want to sit down with people for 5, 6, 7 hours and hang out. I'm not interested in this kind of minute city neoliberal forced way of interacting with other people in some kind of transaction where you catch up with people who you've not seen for 8 weeks because everything's so expensive and you don't have any time. So what I want policy to do in cities is to facilitate the physical space and the space in time for people to be able to relate to each other as human beings, which of course has revolutionary potential, which is why it's dangerous.
So Sarah takes up Nadia's thread. Quote, slowing down the rate of our connections, rather than collecting people like their business cards or stamps, and making those connections deeper and more meaningful, luxuriating in them, is itself a step towards liberation. Instead of turning our desires to the objects we can buy with the proceeds of our endless work, what if we turned our desires back onto one another? Instead of, as Kipnis wrote, rooting desire into consumption, spending time with other people has the potential to disrupt the entire economic system. The process of organising, on the job and off it, is, after all, a process of connection. The first hesitant hello, the chat in the break room, the careful email from a non-work email address are all ways of bridging the artificially created gaps between us to articulate a common interest, to gesture toward the power we can have together. Our desires, as Mark Fisher wrote, are still mostly nameless. Our desire is for the future, for an escape from the impasses of the flatlands of capital's endless repetitions, and it comes from the future, from the very future in which new perceptions, desires, cognitions are once again possible. Those desires can be terrifying when everything about our current lives says they cannot be fulfilled, but they are also the ground from which we can grow something new. To reclaim that sense of exuberance, that space in which to find the connections that matter, we need something more than slight improvements in our individual workplaces, or even massive overhauls in labour laws, though we need both of those things desperately. But beyond that, we need a politics of time, a political understanding that our lives are ours to do with what we will. Society will always make demands of us, and a world that we built to value the relationships we had with others would perhaps make even more of them. But it would be a world where we shouldered those burdens equitably, distributed the work, pleasant and less so, better, and had much, much more leisure time to spend as we like. It would be a world where taking care of one another was not a responsibility sloughed off on one part of the population or one gender, and it would be a world where we had plenty of time to take care of ourselves. Stripped of the need to fight to survive, how much more connection could we create? How much more could we try to know each other? If that's some of the realest stuff you've ever heard, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on LinkedIn. Cheers!